I'm sure we all know the horrible feeling of playing through a fantastic game, having loads of fun, only to find yourself stuck in a boss fight that's downright miserable to the point that it ruins the entire experience for you. However, the opposite can also be true, with titles that are at the lower end of the quality spectrum, getting fights that are much better than the rest of the game gives them any right to be, sticking out like a sore thumb, except not sore, the opposite. A normal thumb, I guess? In any case, we're here to highlight some of those scuffles today. Now, when we say terrible, take it with a pinch of salt. Some of these games aren't that bad, but are, as we like to say, worse than most, or in some cases are simply considered to be less good than other games in their respective series. With all of that in mind then, I'm Peter from TripleJump, and here are 10 great bosses in terrible video games. Number 10. Deathstroke, Batman Arkham Origins. Yeah, I did warn you, didn't I? Batman Arkham Origins may not be a horrible game in the grand scheme of things, but in comparison to the other Arkham titles, it's certainly not the highlight of the Moody Billionaires series. This less than pristine prequel is set 8 years prior to the events of Arkham Asylum, and follows the Caped Crusader as he tries to dodge the 8 assassins who've caught wind of him, thanks to the bounty that the creatively named Black Mask has placed upon him. Most found that the game was fine, but didn't really do anything new with the series' gameplay mechanics or open-world format, and just couldn't justify the need for it. However, not everything was as disappointing, and this was particularly true when it came to the boss fights. One of the standouts is the early battle with the infamous Deathstroke, which starts with players being yanked unceremoniously away from their interrogation of the Penguin before dropping into an arena with the sword-wielding foe. What follows is a fight where Bats has to watch out for flashbangs and use the convenient red barrels to wail on the baddie, knocking him out just in time to see Penguin waltz his way out of the place. So one of them's knocked out and the other one's gone. So much for that interrogation. Number 9. Lan Di, Shenmue 3. It took 18 years for the Shenmue series to finally get a third title, but once it arrived, it was a dated, tedious experience with an ambiguous ending, with little to love for any but the most devoted fans. The game picks up the story of Ryo Hazuki, who has made his way to the mountains of China on his journey back to track down Lan Di, the man who killed his father all the way back at the beginning of the first game. On his way to the confrontation, he takes time to talk with everyone, race turtles, and do basically everything he can to make sure his revenge takes as long as humanly possible. Once players finally reach the ending though, they'll find the big bad is waiting patiently for them, and without so much as a leg cramp, he stands up to confront Ryo in a battle that will test all of the moves he's learned. The epic fight is one that was 2 decades in the making, but even though it comes with the promise of getting desperately sought after revenge, it ends on a cliffhanger, with Lan Di surrounded by flames, but crucially, still alive. Does that mean we might have to do even more of this? Oh, come on, Ryo. Learn how to end things. Just like I will be ending number 8, Galbalan, Ys 3, Wanderers from Ys. Though the previous 2 titles in the series featured the top-down camera that was standard with other JRPGs, Ys 3 Wanderers from Ys opted instead to switch to a view more reminiscent of side-scrolling platformers and the like. Unfortunately, this shift in visual perspective coincided with an equal shift in reviewers' perceptions of the game, resulting in a disappointing installment that was criticized for its boring, repetitive gameplay and inability for the player to make significant story choices. Despite this though, Ys 3 is not without its memorable moments, and one of these is the battle against the final boss, Galbalan. It is admittedly a bit of a chore to even get to this point though, requiring a load of grinding and a special item known as the Stone Statue of the Evil Knight in order to access the boss's island, which in turn makes players navigate a dark maze and find the hidden path that leads to the fight. However, once they finally encounter Galbalan, they'll find themselves in a stressful battle, having to dodge projectiles while simultaneously trying to literally disarm him by smacking his sides. Once his hands have been taken care of, the fight gets even more difficult, but with careful timing and item usage, players can power through to the end, and might even have a good time while they're at it. Number 7. Stained Glass Demon Medieval. Yeah, this is where the caveat in the intro really comes into play. When Medieval originally released, it was met with decent reviews in most cases, but if the remake is anything to go by, it certainly hasn't aged all that well, and so we're giving it a slightly wobbly pass for this list. Again, this game is not terrible, but its remake is worse than some. The comment section is absolutely on fire, isn't it? The game follows skeleton protagonist Sir Daniel Fortescue, who's attempting to redeem himself by saving the kingdom of Gallowmere from the evil sorcerer Zarok. Despite the aforementioned praise that the title garnered, several critics, even at the time, did also find that the gameplay itself was mindless hack-and-slash fare and a bit too straightforward. Thanks to the unique setting and art style, however, the game did have some memorable boss fights. One such example is the Stained Glass Demon, which is found in the Hilltop Mausoleum and is the very first boss players will encounter. It doesn't look like all that much at first, as it's literally just an image in a window, but soon enough, the demon breaks out, and in order to defeat the foe, players will have to rely on their ranged weapons to strike its heart, the only vulnerable point, which becomes exposed for brief periods of time as it attempts to charge its own attacks. Looks like this particular demon's dreams have been shattered. Never mind. Number 6, Sangria, Never Dead. Bizarre third-person shooter Never Dead certainly can't be faulted for a lack of originality, but unfortunately it can be faulted for nearly everything else. As the title suggests, the protagonist Bryce is immortal, which functionally means that instead of getting injured normally, his limbs will flop off any time he takes damage, requiring players to roll around whatever bits are left over and allow him to collect himself, quite literally. This can even be done on demand and is often required in order to solve puzzles, but this strange selling point wasn't enough to make up for poor mechanics and tedious gameplay. However, one of the standouts in this mess of periodically attached body parts is Sangria. No, not that one, although that might help make this game a bit more bearable. An eccentric enemy that is admittedly memorable mostly for his look and demeanour. Encountered early on, but fought properly in a cathedral sometime down the line, this particular demon works for the main baddie, Astaroth, and has never gotten over the fact that he lost a finger to Bryce in their battle 500 years ago. This time, though, Bryce is clearly prepared, and no amount of fancy flips and minions can save the foe. Just the finger doesn't seem so bad now, does it, eh, Sangria? Number 5, Solus, Breakdown. 2003 Xbox title Breakdown had a lot going for it, with its first-person perspective that aimed to be as immersive as possible, requiring players to actually look up, down, or around at the objects that they wanted to interact with before they could use them, even with keycard readers and ladders. Though an interesting premise in theory, it was a lot more clunky in practice and was often disorienting, and this, combined with the uninspired level design, meant that Breakdown became a mediocre experience overall, never living up to its potential. The story, thankfully, was considered to be a high point though, and sees players take on the role of Derek Cole, a man with amnesia and special superhuman abilities. These were gained thanks to an injection of mysterious alien fluid that came from the subterranean Site Zero, home to the Tyann who've been battling with the humans. Look, I said it was a high point, not that it made any sort of sense. One of these beings is Solus, a strong leader and absolute nuisance to Derek through the whole game, pestering him and his companion, Alex Hendrickson, on several occasions. Thankfully, he can eventually be taken out in a satisfying fight with a good old-fashioned 1-2 punch, but not before he manages to get a couple of obnoxious quips out there. Number 4, Ivaldi, Gun Valkyrie. We're moving from one obscure Xbox sci-fi title to another now, as we turn our attention to the third-person shooter, Gun Valkyrie. Actually, this has more in common with Breakdown than science fiction, as the title was also praised for its innovative ideas, but ultimately was severely let down by its controls, which made for an incredibly steep learning curve. Set in alternate history 1906, where Earth has established many extraterrestrial colonies, Gun Valkyrie has players choose either Kelly or Sabarota, who are both members of elite superhuman force, the Gun Valkyrie organization. They're sent to a distant planet in order to investigate both the disappearance of their leader, Hebel Gate, and the mysterious aliens that have appeared, which happen to look like massive insects. Players will then set off on a series of 10 different missions, choosing their preferred character before each, and if they're able to make it to the very end, they'll have to tangle with one last boss, Ivaldi. This foe will absolutely not hold back, testing everything the players have learned thus far and requiring them to have perfect reflexes in order to avoid hitting its whirling blade and devastating attacks. As with any especially tough enemy though, besting this foe will give players a rush of adrenaline and a feeling of accomplishment that they won't soon forget. Number 3. Giganotosaurus, Ninja Gaiden 3. Ninja Gaiden is a long-running and well-established franchise, and it was the original measure for how much frustration players were willing to put up with before they flung their controllers, TVs, and nearby family members out of a window. With so many installments though, it's inevitable that there will be a few that aren't quite up to the quality of the others, and Ninja Gaiden 3 is one of them, with many finding it to be a shallow experience and one that had next to no challenge, which in a series where that's a major selling point is quite an impressive miss. But despite this, there is at least one enemy that stands out far and above the rest, and that is the Giganotosaurus. This massive lizard, being a theropod, is essentially a bigger version of a T-Rex, but it does have fewer teeth and less bite force, although that wouldn't be much of a consolation if you ever happened to meet one on a dark alley, would it? The Giganotosaurus in Ninja Gaiden 3, though, does have extra help thanks to its biotechnological upgrades. However, whoever installed its body armor didn't have the forethought to put any on its head, which means it likely won't be long before players make this dino extinct once more. Number 2. Ustanak, Resident Evil 6. There are many titles in the Resident Evil series that are not all that good, but perhaps the most high-profile and opinion-splitting is Resident Evil 6, with its insistence on turning away from the traditional survival horror of the franchise and focusing instead on action and combat, without really managing to do either one especially well. One other thing that was different from previous entries was the variety of different campaigns that players could pick from. Sure, the ability to choose from at least a couple of different characters has been a staple since the very beginning, with each option giving players access to different weapons, abilities, and areas, and encouraging multiple playthroughs, but having the option to experience one of 4 unique stories was unprecedented. Not all of these were created equal, of course, but one of the better ones is that which follows Jake Muller, if only because it features the game's best enemy. Over the course of Jake's campaign, both he and his companion, a grown-up Sherry Birkin, will encounter a foe called Ustanak. Like the Tyrant, Ustanak is massive and can't be beaten until the end of the campaign, when players are finally able to confront him on some catwalks and eventually punch him into lava, because Capcom clearly can't help themselves. And number 1, The Farmer, Goat Simulator 3. It's honestly a bit surprising that Goat Simulator 3 has anything in it that could be classified as a boss fight, and no, the constant battle with the wonky physics absolutely does not count, despite how difficult it can be at times. However, there actually are a few of them, and if players are willing to put up with the inane antics and already dated memes that the game offers for long enough, they'll eventually find themselves taking on the game's secret boss. This strange portion of the game can only be accessed after players have completed enough quests to open the locked door in the Goat Tower, through which they will encounter the Farmer. He mentions that the boss fight isn't ready yet and suggests that the goat leaves to do other things until it's complete, whereupon he turns his back and crouches invitingly next to a pit. Obviously, the only option is to headbutt him into it, which triggers the boss fight as he rages at the player for not letting him finish, putting them through a series of progressively wackier rounds of battle before the credits can finally roll. It's certainly bizarre, but admittedly a lot of fun. And when it comes down to it, that's really what Goat Simulator is all about.